Hello, ladies. I am so honored that you came to listen today, and I hope you get a lot done while I read to you or talk to you about this and that. And I hope that in your own dwelling, you are learning to be content and have great plans for its improvement. I think that that's the solution to the pursuing of contentment, is to think of future improvement and not to be stressed by it. We'll talk a little bit more about stress today. We're discovering so much. And also, if you would like to get yourself prepared, get dressed, get ready, get your face on, and your hair done. I've had my friend who's the makeup artist, stylist lady, talking to me today, and she was informing me of this new look called Cold Girl. And the idea is to make it look like you've been freezing outside in the cold. And so you have all this redness, the red cheeks and the red nose, and then frost all over your face. So she was talking to me about that, and we discovered that I didn't need it because I already had it from living on a homestead in Alaska, and I'm always cold. And even in the manse here, where you're visiting today, the manse is not a very warm place, and it's built of materials that aren't. It's not insulated, and so I know what it's like to feel cold and to look cold. But today we're having a lovely day, and my mood is up, and I want to edify you. And remember, last time I spoke, we tried to understand the word edify, which means to build up and to improve the mind. And I had mentioned to some of my ladies that come for a Bible study on Thursdays, ladies' Bible class, been going on for 50 years, and I inherited it from my mother-in-law. And of course, it's a whole different group now. They've not been here 50 years, but we discussed things we needed to be careful not to talk about. And I had a list here of some of them. And so I wanted to share that with you, if I can find it, in conversation. And one was, of course, being careful not to reveal things about your personal finances or maybe even a financial disaster. To be careful about that. Avoid correcting people quickly, hasty, sharp replies. Because that's discouraging and it doesn't build up, and learn how to gently guide people into the right thinking. And the other thing was being careful not to talk about your diet, what all it entails. Everybody's is on something different, and the most polite thing to do regarding diet is, if you are on a special eating program, just to look at what there is there if you're in public, and take what you can, but don't make a big deal out of it when you're ordering, and don't say, do you have this and do you have that, and just take what you can and eat around whatever it is you have, and then you won't have to violate your diet. But we have to be careful in conversation, because it's become where it's so open that we can offend many and edify none. And I had some of the things written down, and it was financial failure, and even death, and medications. We don't need to be telling people what medications we're on, and misery, and things that would discourage the very young. Sometimes I'll have people here whose daughters come with them because they think it's a safe place to be, and I have to warn the ladies, let's be careful. You don't want to talk about all your internal problems, all your digestion and elimination, and all the doctor problems you have, and just keep the conversation on the upside and keep it clean. And so while you're getting ready today, and I also wanted to say, while you're here, to click the link in the description box and go to the place on which I have embedded this broadcast, so that you can see a summarization that I write, and maybe some extra pictures. And behind me I have a picture. This is one of those canvas prints. It's not a real painting, but it's canvas on a stretcher bar, I guess you would call it. And it's just a reproduction, but it's by Barbara Mock, and I think she lives in Tennessee or somewhere, but it looked most like a scene from the homestead in Alaska in the summer. You can see the little boat there that my dad built my mother so she could go pick the water lilies, and it looked just so much like it in the summer at the lake, and I wanted to have it, so I finally got to order it, and it takes a while because they just print them, and send them. And so, ladies, today I wanted to encourage you in your homemaking to make it a cheerful place. And we don't have to make it look like a grueling institution where everyone has to be wanting to go somewhere else in order to get some relief from stress. So what we want to do is make them want to stay. And this is one of the things I like to do is look for good art that lifts up, edifies, and inspires. And I think I'll have this for a long time and pass it down to one of my children, even though it was very inexpensive. And I have new things that I want to talk about regarding your getting ready and your appearance. And I'll read to you while you get ready, maybe, okay? And everybody's talking about personal care, self-care, and I'd just like to change that to self-improvement and maintenance. Because self-improvement, personal care, and self-care, they're really a big concern today because so many people are caregivers. And they have to take time off to renew their bodies, to rest, to renew their minds, to build up new brain cells, and to stay alive, because they cannot let the caregiving wear them down. And so I wanted to talk about that. Self-care isn't really a selfish thing. It's self-improvement, and it's renewal, and it glorifies God. And it includes things like time for prayer, and bathing, dressing, taking care of your teeth, politeness and courtesy, and paying close attention to yourself and the way that you speak and act and think. And you're going to have time for this personal care, which is what I call self-improvement and maintenance. And it glorifies God, because your appearance will be relaxed and cheerful, and it will be health and life-giving to someone else in your home. Even your little children need for mommy to look pretty. And I would like to have a little speech sometimes on the apron strings, because in the old days when women wore aprons, they had these long ties in the back, and you could tie it around the waist or the wrist of a small child so they could follow you around. And of course, people mocked the apron strings, and it was intended to run down motherhood and its importance, and also the importance of a child to heed his mother's teachings all of his life. And so they would mock it when a child got a little older, and in order to lure the child away from his parents' values, would say, well, are you allowed to, can you come out with us tonight, or are you tied to your mother's apron strings? And they would mock it. And so even the mothers were so intimidated by it. But apron strings were very important. And I know little children that will hang on to their mother's apron or her skirt or the apron's tie, and follow her around for a little while, and then say, I think I'm okay now, I can go play by myself, or something like that. It's just a little security. And so I just want to give you a brief history on that of my own observation here. And anything that I say here, it's up to you to research it, see if it works for you, and don't ask me for advice on child rearing or marriage, because everybody has their own children, you've got to recognize their needs and their ways and their nature and their sensitivities, and everybody has their own husband and wife, and everybody has their own personalities and their own needs, and I can't make rules for all that. But I would say that the same rule would apply to any kind of relationship between husband and wife or mother and children, and that is to edify and to build up and to improve, help one another in their life's goals, and also to take care of your own character improvement. Most of our problems, I would say, are a result of character. I can't really say something is a marriage problem or a parenting problem. All I can say is there's a character problem in someone's life. And so, as the Bible says, I believe the New Testament says, pay close attention to yourself. And I believe that that was addressed to a young preacher named Timothy, who was supposed to be guiding other people and was told by the apostle to pay close attention to himself. Also in the epistles, it was said to pay close attention to yourself to see that you are in the faith. So you have to constantly check yourself. And so that is my response to marriage and parenting. And if you're homeschooling, your children will be most like the ones they are around. And so whatever habits you want them to pick up, you have to do it yourself. It's a program of self-improvement when you have children. And so dressing well, and your preparation for the day of homemaking is a glorifying thing to do, and it also is an expression of thankfulness that God made us and gave us something to do that was important. So I want to read a few things to you while you get ready. Maybe this can be like music while you get yourself dressed and ready. And I had previously read the chapter in Wives and Daughters by Elizabeth Gaskell. I believe it was written in 18 in the 1800s. It doesn't give a date on here because this is a reproduction, and I believe it was 1864. All right. And I'd previously read how Roger had finally realized that his boyish love for Cynthia was very shallow, and that she was just a fun-loving, pretty girl, but didn't have the kind of depth that he needed, and his father had taken him aside. Mr. Hamley had taken him aside, and it's chapter, I believe I'm reading at the end, and it was chapter, let me just find it here, chapter 60. And his father had said, both my sons found women that they liked, but neither one of you went after little Molly Brown, little Molly Gibson, who has stolen my heart. She would be a great daughter-in-law because she's like one of the family. Of course, she'd gone to live with the Hamleys where Roger lived and took care of his mother while she was ill. And Mr. Hamley loved her so much that he wanted Roger to marry her. And he said, you could ask her. And Roger said, well, she's probably so disgusted with the way I behaved by going after Cynthia, her stepsister, that she probably wouldn't accept me. And his father went away so disappointed. He said, just give it a chance and try for her. And so I'm going to just continue reading that. And Roger had been to see, I guess he finally got convinced, and he'd been to see Mr. Gibson, the father of Molly, and said, I don't know if she would accept me. Do you think she would accept me? And her father said, I don't know, I can't tell, and even if I could, I wouldn't. Only if it's any comfort to you, I may say that my experience has taught me women are unreasoning creatures and are just as likely to not to love a man who has been throwing away his affections. So he told Roger in a very out of the way, you've been throwing away your love, and Molly is the one for you. And he said, thank you, sir. I see you mean to give me encouragement, and I had resolved never to give Molly a hint of what I felt until I had spoken to you. This is so important for you young people. Remember, if you're a young man and you're listening to this, or you're at home with your parents, living with them, and you develop an interest in someone, make sure you go to her father first and clear it to even speak to her or be a friend to her or even visit her at your house or even, get her interested in you. Make sure you clear it with the parents first, because it can cause an awful backlash. Even the most liberal families that don't believe in a family courtship can have an awful reaction. It can cause a lot of trouble. And they'll do everything in their power to thwart you if they don't like you. So be sure and clear it first with the father, as Roger had done. And if you haven't read Wives and Daughters, you can get the DVD series and watch every little bit of it. Absorb yourself in it. Try to understand it. Try to understand what's happening there. We see so much in this brilliant book and the movie. We've been talking a lot about stress, and people will say, oh, I wish we lived back in the 1800s. There wasn't so much stress. There was a lot of stress, and you look at poor little Molly. The opening scene of the BBC movie shows her alone because her mother had passed away, and she was sent to a party for the villagers by some rich folks, and she fell asleep and in the room of the woman who took care of the children, and she was so unhappy because her father had not come to get her yet, and so this sadness is felt that she only had her father. And then her father got engaged and remarried, so in a sense she lost all the attention she got from her father. And then Roger was a good friend of hers, although I don't think they were thinking about marriage, but the stepmother's daughter came to live with them, and Roger took a fancy to her and totally ignored Molly, and Molly felt another loss. And I'm trying to think that throughout the whole story, it was one loss after another. Yes, there was stress, and then she went to take care of Mrs. Hamley, who was Roger's mother, and nursed her through her illness, and she passed away, and she was like a mother to her, and she missed her. So there was another loss. Can you imagine the stress? But this was common to people, and if you'll look at your own life, you'll find there were lots of losses. And then, but throughout it, we see a character here in Molly that, and I wish I had my phone here. I might have to get up and go get it. Because it was so good. Someone sent me a part of the original Fascinating Womanhood booklets, and it was talking about thinking about good things in order to make the stress of the bad things fade a little bit, and to get your mind on something else, and to have a hobby, and to have other interests, because they are made to distract you from getting too bogged down in grief. And then after her friend Mrs. Hamley had passed away, then she felt that she had lost Roger as a friend, and didn't realize that Cynthia was flighty and shallow and would probably move on to someone else. But in the end, because of her character, because of her steadiness, and I think this is very important, to be stable. we see in one scene in the movie how she breaks down and cries when she knows she's lost Roger, but then she recovers like a child would. Children recover quickly, and so she recovers and she actually congratulates him, and that builds her up and builds him up, and she is better for it. But so I want you to listen to this as I read what happens after Cynthia has called it off with Roger. He says, I resolved never to give Molly a hint of what I felt until I spoke to you and tried to win her by every means in my power. I determined not to repeat the former scene and former place in your drawing room, however I might be tempted. That was where he got engaged to Cynthia, and perhaps after all she avoided me when she was here last. So the father answers, Mr. Gibson, my favorite character is Mr. Gibson. Now, Roger, I've listened to you long enough. If you've nothing better to do with your time than to talk about my daughter, I have. When you come back, it will be time enough to inquire how far your father would approve of such an engagement. So he tells Roger, you better talk to your father first. I think it's wonderful that we've got a script like this to show us that people involved the previous generation in their lives. They didn't just go out and make plans on their own without informing their parents. And now we have so many heartbroken parents because they find out on social media a decision that their child has made. It might not be the end of the earth or anything, but it could be the purchase of something, or it could be a change in career, or it could be a decision to go off far away, or even marriage without their knowledge. It is so sad that people started ignoring how the parents felt, how everyone else felt. My children don't even like me to go off and do something without them knowing about it. So we are interconnected in many ways. So he said, well, my father himself urged it upon me the other day, but then I was too much in despair, and I thought it was too late. And what means have you, said Mr. Gibson, of maintaining a wife? I always thought that point was passed by too lightly over when you formed your hurried engagements to Cynthia. I'm not mercenary. Molly has some money independently of me that she, by the way, knows nothing of. Not much, but I can allow her something. But all these things must be left until your return. Well, then you will sanction my attachment to your daughter? I don't know what you mean by sanction it. I can't help it. I suppose losing one's daughter is necessary evil. Still, seeing the disappointed expression on Roger's face, it is but fair for you to say, I'd rather give my child, my only child, remember, to you than to any man in the world. What wonderful words those are for a young man to hear, that the father would rather entrust their daughter to him than anyone else. That will show you that that's the right one. Thank you, said Roger, shaking hands with Mr. Gibson, almost against the will of the latter. And I may see her just once before I go? Decidedly not. There I come in as a doctor as well as a father. Remember, there had been a disease going around. No. Well, will you take a message to her, at any rate? To my wife and to her conjointly, I will not separate them. I will not in the slightest way be a go-between. Very well, said Roger. Tell them both as strongly as you can how I regret your prohibition. I see I must submit, but if I don't come back, I'll haunt you for having been so cruel. Come, I like that. Give me a wise man of science and love, no one to beat him for folly. Goodbye. He was just saying, that's quite a statement, isn't it? He was just saying, you might be really book smart, but you're really dumb with people. Goodbye, you will see Molly this afternoon. To be sure, and you will see your father, but I don't heave such portentous sighs at the thought. Mr. Gibson gave Roger's message to his wife and to Molly that evening at dinner. It was but what the latter had expected after her father had said of the very great danger of infection. But now that her expectation came in the shape of a final decision, it took away her appetite. She submitted in silence, talking about Molly here, but her observant father noticed that after this speech of his, she only played with the food on her plate. That's one thing we notice, don't we, about our children when they're not feeling well. And later on, I wanted to talk about this mind-body connection, especially between appetite and emotion. When people are off their food, sometimes they're getting sick, or sometimes they're upset emotionally about something. I can't eat if there's trouble. I can't. Now, some people learn to eat emotionally and get some kind of relief from that. But I determined that, and I hope you will too, that any kind of self-care or any kind of relief from stress will be building us up and building our homes up rather than destructive. So in other words, you don't go out and eat things that are bad for you just to relieve the stress, because that's going to create more stress when you find out how it's ruined your health. And we won't go out and buy things that make us feel good for the moment, because we'll be under more stress when we find out how low we are on funds. So if we do something, we build, we clean, we rebuild, paint, we make things that we can use, and we improve our home and ourselves. And even if all you do is get dressed up all over again, that's an improvement, and it doesn't cost anything to your health. And so he noticed that it says her observant father noticed that after this speech of his, she only played with the food on her plate and concealed a good deal of it under her knife and fork. We used to do that when we were kids, didn't we? We'd hide the food we didn't like by putting our napkin on top of it or something like that. And he said, lover versus father, he thought half sadly. Now, in the movie, they had him saying it to Roger, but this is how it really happened, was he thought this. Lover wins, and he, too, became indifferent to all that remained after his dinner. Mrs. Gibson pattered on, and nobody listened. So he became indifferent to his dinner because of this thought that he had. The day of Roger's departure came. Molly tried hard to forget it in working away at a cushion she was preparing as a present to Cynthia. You know, Mr. S. used to be away a lot, and every time he went on a trip, I got the threads and the fabric to make a little cushion, and I have a little collection of old cushions. And even my daughter got into making them. We would get a patchwork pattern to follow, or we would find an embroidery pattern to follow, and we make these little cushions. And it took up some of the time, give us something to look forward to, and so we weren't just waiting. So Molly tried hard to forget Roger's departure in working away at a cushion she was preparing as a present to Cynthia. See, these things, even though it's a work of fiction, she wrote about her own times. She didn't write about her pastimes or anything like that. She wrote about what was happening in the village where she lived, and so we get clues as to some of the things that they did, and I believe this is one of the things they did. Today, what would a woman do? She's so imbued with stress and distress over someone's departure that she couldn't even concentrate on sewing a cushion. People did worsted work in those days. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all wrong. She was thinking of something else and had to unpick it. It was a rainy day, too, and Mrs. Gibson, who had planned to go out and pay some calls, they used to go out and pay calls. That means if someone had come to see you, you would return the favor and go and see them. I don't think you'd stay all day, but I just think you'd make the polite call. And this was really important. And when you read books like Simple Social Graces by Linda Lichter, you noticed, and also the Jane Austen Diet, where he talked about social life, you noticed that they needed it, and they knew when they needed it, and they knew when they needed to get away from it. But they had to have that human contact. They knew it was time to see someone, and that it would do them good. But the polite talk was so important because it could never turn foul. It could never turn bad. It was designed not to get into any issue, but just be polite, and that you would hear a voice of another person. You would see a polite face, and they would give you your compliments, and you give them your compliments back. And that's what the little thank you notes are like. They're just a little compliment, and it's would be nice to have a whole session on this, how important those things were. And so often, especially in my lifetime as a minister's wife, sometimes someone who had severe problems could turn visits to other people into nightmares. And I don't know if it's just a modern phenomena or what. It would be something worth exploring. It says it had rained, and Mrs. Gibson, who had planned to go out and pay some calls, had to stay indoors. And this made her, Mrs. Gibson, restless and fidgety. She kept going backwards and forwards to different windows in the drawing room to look at the weather. Do you ever do that when the weather is blustery and rainy? Do you go out? I don't. I quit looking at it after a while. Sometimes I actually close the drapes so I don't have to look at a black window. She kept looking out the windows in the drawing room to look at the weather, as if she imagined that while it rained at one window, it might be fine at another window. Molly, come here. Who is that man wrapped in a cloak? There, near the park wall, under the beech tree. He has been there this half hour and more, never stirring, and looking at this house all this time. I think it's very suspicious. Molly looked, and in an instant recognized Roger under all his wraps. I don't know if you know about the clothing of Regency era or Victorian era, but the women often had, and the men had, a wrap, and what it was like a coat that didn't have any structure or sleeves to it. You just wrap it over you. And I'll try to include some pictures of the wrap that women had. In fact, they were quite warm, probably more so than the coats we have today. And you could loosen them easily if you got too hot. And they were called a wrap. Molly looked, and in an instant recognized Roger under all his wraps. Her first instinct was to draw back, the next to come forward and say, "Why, Mamma, it's Roger Hamley. Look now, he's kissing his hand." That's when they would kiss their hand and blow a kiss. "He's wishing us goodbye in the only way he can." Remember, he was going to go to Africa on a scientific journey for a university. And she responded to his sign, but she was not sure if he perceived her modest, quiet movement, for Mrs. Gibson became immediately so demonstrative that Molly fancied that her eager, foolish, pantomimic motions must absorb all his attention. "I call this so attentive of him," said Mrs. Gibson, in the midst of a volley of kisses of her own hand. "Really, it's quite romantic. It reminds me of former days. But he will be late. I must send him away. It is 12:30. And she took out her watch and held it up, tapping it with her forefinger and occupying the very center of the window. Now you see this in the movie. They did it very well. You could understand this story better if you'll watch the movie first. And she took her watch and held it up, tapping it with her forefinger and occupying the very center of the window. Molly could only peep here and there, dodging now up, now down, now on this side, and now on the side of that perpetually moving arms of hers. She fancied she saw something of a corresponding movement on Roger's part. At length he went away slowly, and often looking back in spite of the tapped watch. Mrs. Gibson at last retreated, and Molly quietly moved from her place to see his figure once more before the turn of the road hid it from view. He, too, knew where the last glimpse of Mrs. Gibson's house was to be obtained, and once more he turned, and his white handkerchief floated in the air. Molly waved hers high, with eager longing that it should be seen, and then he was gone. And Molly returned to her worsted work, happy, glowing, sad, content, and thinking to herself how sweet is friendship. Now I must stop there because I have so much more to talk to you about. You'll just have to wait for next time for the rest of the story. And I would like to talk to you about a few other things. I have made a change in some of the sayings that I use, and one of them is, I call that place back there that used to be a garage the hoarder's room, because that's where I keep all the folding cots and the blankets and the bedding, the extra things that I need when the descendants come. I keep all my extra dishes and any kind of decor in there that I might use. And I have quit calling it the hoarder's room because I remembered Elizabeth Bennet saying, "What must he think of me?" And I thought, what must people think when I say I have a hoarder's room? It's not a hoarder's room. It's the family archives. I've got all our albums and our old books, and I've got everything in there that tells what we've done over the years. So it's the family archives. And you ladies, you do not have a junk drawer or a junk room. You have family archives or your own archives. Doesn't that sound Smithsonian? And so I wanted to tell you too something that would be very helpful at home to reduce stress. And I think it's very important because one of the things I said last time that I believe was getting ready and getting dressed, fixing your hair, and whatever you do in the morning, even your little stretch exercises that you take in your chair, or your prayer, or making a list, or having your cup of tea, are stress reducers. If you don't feel like when you have it on a list, you don't start getting stressed over doing it. And the other day I had a video I was watching with these animated exercises that weren't real people, but it was a stress reduction exercise, and I got so relaxed I didn't have any motivation to do anything. I was so unworried. I looked at my list and I said, oh, it says here I must do the laundry. I got so relaxed I couldn't do it. So you have to be careful not to get stressed over this list of how not to get stressed, of stress-free things to do. So I'm not calling it the hoarder's room. I'm calling it the family archive. It's the archives, the archive room. And so one of the nice things to do every day is to put yourself on some kind of a course. And that is a stress reduction course. And of course, the first thing to do would be to prepare yourself mentally and physically for the job ahead. And plan something. And that's what the list is all about. It's all about planning something. And even if you don't do it, writing it down sometimes helps settle your mind. So just plan a meal, or even something that you want to do. And sing. Have you ever thought how long has it been since you sang? Well, sing something. And then make up a song, make up the words, and just sing. When you go on your next little walk, and the walk doesn't have to be a long ways away, it can just be around your own perimeter of your own house, indoors or outdoors, and read something. Just read a paragraph in something. I read far more than a paragraph to you, but you could just read one and read it aloud, just to hear how fluently you speak, or just to understand it better. Reading aloud is handy. Also, hand wash one thing. Just take your gloves. We have these winter gloves and they get rather soiled. Put them on your hands, put lots of soap on them, wash them out, and then hang them up. And hang something on, something to dry naturally. And another thing that I thought of is that we've given up a lot. And I've been talking to my children about this, what did we give up that seemed to create a buffer for stress? And we talked about play and how some of the things we did that helped our minds feel settled. Playing, sometimes playing was actually not playing with each other, but playing by themselves. And we talked about that a little bit. And I know a lady who every now and then she's just had enough of all the bad news and stress in her life, and she has an old porcelain doll, and she'll just get it out and change its clothes and comb its hair, and afterwards she says she feels better. So another thing that we used to do a lot was pack a bag at home. I don't know if you remember doing that when you were younger at home, to pretend you're going on a trip, and you'd pack a bag and you'd keep it in your own room, pretend you were spending the night somewhere, and everything you needed was in your bag. And we just enjoyed it so much. And another thing you can do is one of my oldest grandsons came to visit. I just hated these kids get licenses, because then they're gone somewhere and they get jobs and everything, but now they're starting to drive over here. So he took me on a walk, and he identified bird song and identified the name of the bird, like the white-crowned something or other, and the chickadee, and taught me how to identify them. And he actually showed me that you can actually see these birds. You hear them in a tree, but of course I never see them. And he showed me how to look. And he had a fancy camera, and he was getting close-up pictures of these birds. I don't know how he did that, but he got very close to the branch and actually saw the birds and showed me how to see them and how much time. And this is just in a ordinary yard. It's not like you have to go to a park or anything. Just right where you live, you can see them. And so how much time do people take? There used to be, years ago, you could belong to a bird watching group that would go out once in a while. I prefer to do things just one other person, which to me is less stress, because you don't have to deal with other people's opinions or worry about being self-conscious about anything or feeling stupid about what you say. So just one-on-one is just a better deal. And so when things start to overwhelm you at home, and it's always going to be a day in which it looks like you've gotten behind in something and you feel overwhelmed, is the first thing that I think is very helpful. I've talked about this with my descendants, and that is that thank God, start thanking God for small things, for the fact that you are on your feet, that you're alive, that you've been allowed to do this work, and it changes everything when you thank God for your responsibility. And also how to avoid spending a lot of time on caregiving for yourself, like self-care. Because self-care, you could spend half a day doing all those things that help you feel better and never get anything done. And so I was talking to a friend that suggested you just integrate it all within all of your work. And you can stop for a minute, pray, stop for a minute, breathe, stretch, have a drink. And this is this wild cat, and it's not the cat that doesn't belong to me, and he's just coming in for a little while, but I don't know where he goes. And I don't like kids out at night, but he's out at night a lot. And I wasn't going to have a pet because we had pets over the years, and it's always so hard on us when they die. And I think that if you get a pet too late in life, they're going to outlive you. So how to avoid spending a lot of time on self-care or anti-stress care is to integrate it throughout the day. And we see this in the past with our own parents and grandparents. They would do a little chore and then they would stop and sit down, have a cup of tea, or pay attention to their reading matter, or send a card, get a card ready to send to someone. They did all kinds of, even when washing dishes, most houses had a little door just next to the kitchen and you could just step outside in the sun. The things that brought peace to them, we don't have that so much today. For example, you could see your garden outside the kitchen window, and when you saw something coming up, you could go out there and pick something for your lunch. And so integrate self-care, or what I call self-improvement, throughout your day, so that you don't have to take all day long to do your exercises, to pray, to get dressed, to have your tea and all that. You just integrate it throughout the day. Now, I want to read from Brian Kozlowski's book here, because, wait a minute. First, I'm going to read something from Fascinating Womanhood. Now, as you recall, I told you about Janine, who has the Happy Homemaker site, and she has been reading the original Secrets of Fascinating Women, the little pamphlets that came out in 1920 or 1922. And that's what Helen Andelin did, is she just elaborated on that and wrote a new book called Fascinating Womanhood. And anybody can do it. Those pamphlets are now copyright free, so anybody, and it's especially important that you do the endings of, there's Jane Austen books, Sanditon, and the other one, I forget what the other ones are called, but were unfinished novels, and you're allowed to finish them and write your own. And even with the Secrets of Fascinating Women, you can do what you want with that because it's copyright free. But this was Helen Andelin's book, and a lot of people didn't like her book, so they just took her book and rewrote it. You're not supposed to do that. They should have gone to the originals and just rewrote those. But she has something here about stress, and it's called adversity. And it's something that our generation, for some reason, has forgotten. And remember last time I talked about a novel that she referred to, where it says that it's important to cast light on dark days. And so she says, smile through adversity. It seems to be a natural part of life to have periods of discouragement. Okay? That should be, I think a lot of people were impatient with people of my generation when we were really young, like 8 and 9 years old, and we would get discouraged because they didn't think that it was a problem. It was probably a natural part of life, and they didn't feel necessary to explain it. And so she says, it seems to be a natural part of life to have periods of discouragement. Smiling at such times may be unnatural, but with all Christian and moral teachings, we are expected to do the supernatural thing. A mark of true character, especially womanly character, is to smile through adversity, as expressed by the following lines by Ella Wheeler Wilcox. This is a poem my children loved. And of course, we forgot it. At the minute there was some kind of some disappointment, we forgot it. But it's good to remind ourselves. It's easy enough to be pleasant when life flows by like a song, but the one worthwhile is the one who can smile when everything goes dead wrong. For the test of the heart is trouble, and it always comes with the years. But the smile worthwhile, but the smile that is worth the praises of earth is the smile that shines through the tears. And we saw that in this book, Wives and Daughters, and you can see it. If you'll watch the movie carefully, you'll see her where she just wiped away her tears, decided to be cheerful. And when she offered a prayer about Roger, she said, please let him be well and keep him alive, even if he never comes back to me, or something like that. She wanted the best for him. So she says here about health, and we've been talking a lot about health because I wanted to talk about stress. You can more easily smile and look radiant if you feel well. Well, I think it also goes the other way. If you're not feeling well, a smile makes a little bit of a health boost to you. If you don't, if your body is sickly, depleted, weak, or tired, it is difficult to look radiant or to smile. Health is the topic of the next chapter, an important part of radiance. And so she has this whole thing on health, and I think that I probably read it to you once before. She said, eat properly, avoid processed foods, get enough sleep. So I want to read to you about sleep because I'm going to try to include the other two books about sleep. Get enough sleep. Excuse me, I'm just looking at my notes here. Now, sleep will give you some armor against stress. And most people are confronted with what I call raw stress, and they haven't had enough sleep, and then the stress causes them to lose more sleep because they can't get their mind settled enough to actually have good rest. And so she says, get enough sleep. To be assured of getting enough sleep, set a specific time to go to bed. If you find it hard to get to bed on time, is it because you have too much to do? Now, sometimes I will look at the house and say, I know I need to get this done today, but I am not feeling very awake. I want to go to sleep. And so I'll just go ahead and go to bed, and by the next morning I'm feeling so much better that the job is even lighter. And if you get really, really tired, it seems like work gets more laborious. And sometime I'd like to read to you about Once Upon a Time in America by Eric Sloan, about the ballet of the farmer before there was machinery. It's very interesting on how his labor was light, even though they didn't have automatic farming. So she said, for sleep to be restful, ask yourself if the things you must do are more important than sleep. And I say this to any young mother. Your sleep and your children's sleep is more important than anything, because then you won't be sharp or short with them. Just go to sleep and leave your house. You'll probably worry about it. I worried about it a lot, and especially as a preacher's wife, because I knew that the minute I stopped paying attention to the house, somebody was going to be over. But the only time you have to worry about it is if it's a mess for more than 2 weeks. Then you're in trouble. But if you can get a few nights of good sleep, or even sleep in the day, I think it's going to give you the more energy that you need. So, for sleep to be the most restful, avoid eating after 6 p.m. And I've had more people tell me that they don't eat after 4, but avoid eating after 6 p.m., go to bed before 10 p.m., and sleep on a good mattress. The hours of sleep before midnight are more restful than those after. That is so true. This is why I don't think anyone knows this. Why this is, I don't think anyone knows, but experience has proven it to be true. So now I'm going to read about sleep. And if you have things you need to do, I hope you're not just sitting here watching me, because I don't have anything to show you. But this is Stormy Omation's Greater Health God's Way. Now, in many ways, I think I prefer Brian Kozlowski's book, The Jane Austen Diet. He goes deeper into the mind-body connection, which I really, really appreciate. And so I have steps to endure sound sleep. Go to bed early. The dark hours before midnight are said to give you the most rest and do the most good. So the way to do that, so that you can do that, is if you're off kilter with your sleep and you're a night owl and you're used to staying up late, would be to force yourself to get up extremely early one day, don't take a nap, and then collapse around 4 or 5 in the evening, and then you'll start on a different cycle. So go to bed early. The dark hours before midnight are said to give you the most rest and do the most good. God made darkness for rest. Very good. God made darkness for rest. Sometime I want to talk to you about a scientific discovery that someone made. You remember when in the Old Testament it talked about Jacob sleeping on a pillow of stone? Remember when he had the dream of the angels going up and down the ladder? I learned something about that. And that is that people had these pillows where you would put like a soft blanket or something inside, and they were a curved metal stone or something like that, and you didn't actually sleep straight on the stone, but you had something like your cloak or something on it. It's very interesting. So, the dark hours before midnight will give you more rest and do the most good. God made darkness for rest. It has been proven that the best sleep is obtained during those dark hours. Of course, I know this isn't always possible, but when you have a choice, make this your way of life. You will find that you can sleep a solid 8 hours from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. Now, I'm one of these people that doesn't believe in the 8-hour sleep. I believe that our bodies probably are designed to wake up every now and then, and there's nothing wrong with that. You'll feel fresher and have more energy and clear-mindedness than if you sleep 8 hours from 4 a.m. until noon. Yeah, you just feel groggy when you sleep in the morning. Sleep in the morning, just feel groggy. There is a quality of rest that happens in those evening hours before midnight. Isn't that interesting? Your body was made to sleep during those hours. If you are one of those people who is truly a night person, then the Lord must have called you to the night watch for a purpose. So, I wanted to make sure that you heard that. And then we'll go on to Brian Kozlowski's book and what he has to say about it, about sleep. The evening is closing in. First, the darkening sky should compel our bodies to wind down. Yeah, shouldn't you start feeling? But unfortunately, many people in this society that we've been thrust into have been programmed almost to stay up late. It might have begun with television, I don't know, but first, the darkening sky should compel our bodies to wind down. Natural darkness was an impenetrable barrier to how much work the Austinites could accomplish at night. Well, yes, of course, you didn't want to burn your expensive candles. And so there was a limit to how much light that you had. This was Jane Austen's closing in time, when shutters were drawn, candles were lit, and people settled in for a quiet evening. It says balls were periodically attended and moonlight walks in summer a special treat, but by and large there was no occasion for serious exercise or work. Austen speaks of the rosy dimness of Regency candles. They emitted enough light for the usual evening amusements of Austen world, reading, playing cards, games, or music, but not enough to get wilder than that. Yes, I always told children, you wind down in the evening. You do quiet things in the evening. You don't wind up. Yawns gradually commence, and by 10 p.m., the majority of Austen world is ready for bed. I read somewhere that if it started getting dark at 4, they started getting ready for bed and started yawning, and they were ready to be in bed by 6. And that would mean that their last meal was earlier, and they'd be less inclined to get fat, because the later you eat, the more possibility there is that you'll gain weight, because you're not using up the the food. Today, most of us only experience this Regency nighttime ritual on camping trips. As the sun sets, and with only the amber light from a fire, our bodies instinctually settle down, popping into sleeping bags far earlier and more tired than usual. Normally, however, closing in at night means clicking on. Bright lights and even brighter screens mean that now we work and exercise at whatever hour we wish, though ignoring the cues of darkness comes with unintended consequences, sickness for one. Working too frequently at night is now listed as a suspected carcinogen by the American Cancer Society. The biological stress involved in overriding your body's natural desire to wind down at night can wreak havoc on your immune system, not to mention your sleep quality. As Austen knew well, being too busy or too stressed at night is the one thing guaranteed to keep Austen's characters up and buzzing. "I have passed a wretched night," says Marianne, stressed out by the scoundrel Willoughby. And when that happens, Austenites rely on the same old-fashioned darkness to wind them back down again. Ladies, I've been here quite a while. I've probably disturbed you enough, and I hope that you have a wonderful day at home and that you can maybe listen to this again and get a few things done. And so thank you for all you do for me, for your prayers, and I love you. Stay close to Christ. Bye.